Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-2 game series against the Cleveland Guardian. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins start off their home season, Dan, in absolute terrible fashion, losing 2 of 2 games to the Cleveland Guardians. Game 3 postponed due to weather. It's still coming down outside, Dan, as we're speaking. And the 2 games they did play, my goodness, Dan, hard to draw up a worse script for the Twins' home games this season.
We talked about this a little bit before. I don't like that they didn't make Friday available. Like, weather forecasts are pretty good in the Midwest. It looked on Friday that Sunday's weather was going to be crummy, didn't it?
Yes, it was obvious that this weekend that Sunday was going to be the difficult game to get in, and they didn't have to move the opener from Thursday to Friday. So yeah, to your point, Dan, it does seem that moving the game from Sunday to Friday wouldn't have been a terrible call.
And now the Twins are going to stack games. I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong too, but last year they actually didn't have a lot of rainouts. It was kind of a good season for that. But to start off this way, they've only played 7 games. Now, luckily, they have played very poorly, I would say, overall in these 7 games. And so maybe it's good to backload the schedule. But at the same time, these off days are kind of adding up when you would hope they could get a few more games in. I mean, some teams in the majors have played 10 games now, and the Twins are still sitting at 7.
It's hard for me to figure out that the season has started, like, honestly, because they don't play every day and because they're playing a lot of day games. I haven't just sat on my couch and watched a 7 o'clock start baseball game. These games matter, Dan. It would be nice if the Twins realize that these games matter the way that they're playing also.
I know, and we're going to see as we go through the segments the same thread that we were talking about at the beginning of last year, hitting in clutch situations with runners in scoring position. Just one quick stat to start with. In 72 at-bats with runners in scoring position, they have an OPS of .463, which is 29th in the majors, just 16 RBI. So that's pretty dreadful. We're talking, 1 in every 4.5, 5 at-bats in that situation. They're even knocking in a run, let alone getting a hit.
Now, Dan, it is a small sample size. I hate to remind you about the current
But I love to jump
size.
to conclusions about small sample sizes. We will talk more about that as we go on. But yeah, just an unfortunate series here. The Twins now drop to 3-4 on the season. They're not in first place. They're not even close, David.
No, it is early, though. It does feel a little bit doom and gloom to be talking about their hits with runners in scoring position 7 games into the season. Last season, at least, we were 20 or 30 games into the season where they couldn't get a hit with the bases loaded to save the season in any way.
Well, I think it's time to get into the series recap.
Series recap.
Game 1, Dan, I'm pumped. It's the opener. I'm there. I'm in my seats. Pablo is on the mound. It's feeling good. And before the game even started, Dan, the festivities were well underway. Dick Bramer, of course, among the attendees, having the broadcast booth dedicated to him, Dan. Now the Dick Bramer broadcast booth. His exit was still weird, Dan. It's still confusing. And even on The Athletic, where they were sort of recapping the opening day festivities, they linked to an article that's like, yeah, he didn't really want to go yet.
It is really bizarre. And didn't he throw out the first pitch, too, to Joe Mauer?
To Joe Mauer, yeah. It was a cool moment, and it was a little bit weird because it was a little weird, I think, to choose Mauer. Because, like, wouldn't you prefer to be somebody who the people would care less about than you? You know what I mean? Like, Joe Mauer's going to enter the Hall of Fame. He's kind of upstaging himself by throwing that pitch to Joe Mauer.
Like Mike Redmond, right? Like bring him back or something like that. Like that would have made a little bit more sense.
We talk about Mike Redmond so much on this show. I have no idea why. Like it's such a footnote in Twins history, but we love talking about Mike Redmond. But anyway, yeah, so Joe Mauer was there. Dick Bramer was there. They had the whole festivities. There was a cool flyover, but it wasn't like jets. I don't know, some sort of military plane that carries stuff. I don't know what those ones are called.
Cargo plane, I believe is the name for that.
I'm sure there's like a more official name than that, but like it flew so low, Dan. I was like, oh my goodness. Like I felt like I could see the people in it, Dan.
Well, the Twins lose this game 4-2, unfortunately, and a long game. 2 hours and 57 minutes? I mean, that's like 2019 or something.
It felt like pre-pitch clock, Dan. And I was at the stadium, and it just felt like every inning was a slog. Because not much excitement took place, it just made the game feel that much longer.
Pablo struggled a bit. He only got through 5 2/3 innings. Not terrible, but the Twins need their starters to apparently be perfect to be able to win any baseball games at this point. And Tommy Watkins is already at it early in this baseball game.
I can't confirm this, okay? Because I was at the game, I wasn't watching on TV, and I couldn't find a replay that showed Tommy Watkins in frame. But it's bottom of the second, Correa's on second, and Vasquez reaches on an error by the shortstop. You know where the shortstop plays baseball, right, Dan?
I do.
It's typically between second and third base, is typically where the shortstop is. So Correa's moving from second to third. I am convinced that Tommy Watkins tried to send him home on an error by the shortstop. The ball was right there. Correa is probably 4 to 10 feet off of the bag. And so there's only one way that he does that, and that's if Watkins was sending him on this error to the shortstop. Are you kidding me?
He's not Byron Buxton. The plantar fasciitis is better, but like nobody's going to confuse Carlos Correa for being the fleetest player in the league. I think the percentage I saw, he was like up to 57th or something on sprint speed, which is pretty good compared to last year's 30, but he's not all the way back yet.
No, but my goodness, Dan, nobody should be sent in that circumstance. Byron shouldn't be sent in that circumstance either.
It's the element of surprise.
He's watching him, Dan. After the shortstop picks up, what surprise is there? That he went? That's the surprise?
He's just daring him to throw. Yeah, it's not a good idea. But nevertheless, the Twins are just, it's unfortunate here because, again, they have 12 opportunities with runners in scoring position, and they just can't seem to get there. And that's been unfortunate. And even Wallner playing in left, I don't know. I'm still not convinced that Matt Wallner is absolutely ready for the show right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's there for his bat, and he just can't really be a liability in the field. He doesn't need to make expert plays, but here's the thing, Dan. I was sitting in left field, and there's a ball hit by Kwan that Wallner misread. You could tell off the bat he misread. He took 4 steps back before he had to run in, and it dropped for a single. And I was just like, that one's definitely on Wallner. So one of those runs at least can be chalked up to Wallner not playing that ball correctly in left.
The Guardians get 3 runs in that inning, so then they have a 3-0 lead through 4. Twins get 1 in the 5th, and then in the 6th, the Guardians add another one here on kind of a wacky play, a mistake by Carlos Correa. It's short.
I want to build a championship culture.
Very rare mistake, and it's sort of hilarious because the inning after this, they put up a stat about how few errors Carlos Correa had last season, and I'm like, this is a weird time to bring attention to this. But top of the 6th, bases loaded, it's a 3-2 count. The ball's hit to Correa, seems like a pretty routine play, but he bobbles it. So the runner from third has scored. The runner on second is advancing to third. The runner from first overruns second base because he's thinking that the play is still sort of in motion. Correa goes to throw back to second to Julian. Well, now the runner who was on third now is running home. So Julian goes home to Vasquez. Vasquez throws it to Correa. So now you have this rundown happening between home and third base, and Correa bobbles it, barely gets his hands on it to like soft toss it to Santana. Santana has the ball snow cone in his glove, and he manages to hang on to it and make the tag. But all of that being said, had Correa fielded that cleanly, obviously the run doesn't score, and then it's a 3-1 ball game as opposed to a 4-1 ball game at that point.
Your description of it being Little League is very accurate. That's how it would go in the Little League. And unfortunately, then the Twins were only able to get one more run. The bullpen was great. We're going to talk more about the bullpen later, but the missed opportunities, this is a winnable game.
Certainly a winnable game, and anytime that your starter is only going to give up technically 3 runs, I would say, you should be able to put some runs on the board to support.
Well, game 2 is a similar story. The Twins lose this one 3-1. Joe Ryan does give you that precious quality start. 6 innings, 5 hits, 3 runs, all of them earned, all on one play. And then the 7 strikeouts. I thought maybe this was going to snowball out of control for him, but he was able to kind of right the ship. But again, the bats just aren't there. 0 for 11 with runners in scoring position.
They're going for the streak, Dan. They want to break one of the worst streaks in baseball. It's the Cubs. I forget what season, but it's 0-48 with runners in scoring position. Joe Ryan looks decent. The one mistake he made was a big one to make because he had 2 guys on. If you look at the pitch chart, Dan, it's not good. It's like it's middle, like 94. And it's just like, yeah, that one got deposited into the left field seats pretty easily.
The Twins do get a run on a Kirilloff triple. I think it's 3rd game in a row with a triple. I was confused as to why that was even originally called an error because is that a play you expect a first baseman to make? And And the fact that he gets a triple out of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd that you can give it an error when the guy gets to third and there only be one mistake or one error recorded during that whole transaction. But Naylor couldn't see the ball come up on the hop, and he tried to backhand it with his glove as opposed to getting in front of it. So sort of a fundamentals there. Like,
right.
Yeah, he probably could have knocked it down, but he didn't touch it. And typically you're not awarded an error, especially in the outfield, unless you touch it. But in the infield, it's like you can have a missed play. In this instance here, I think it would have been a tough play to make. And because he got to third, it was a ball hit down the line. I think an error is a weird call in that circumstance.
I think it is too. And that's the only run that the Twins would get. It did give them a lead, but that home run came in the second. And from there, the Twins only 2 hits. Now, they did draw 7 walks, but the strikeouts, 14 strikeouts in this game after having 15 in game 1. And now on the season, David, they have 73 strikeouts in 7 games. They don't look terrible if you just look at the raw league list of who has the most strikeouts. But if you extrapolate that out to 9 or 10 games, they're up in the top 5 again.
I was thinking that with the loss of Joey Gallo, that would really help the Twins' cause here as far as the strikeouts were concerned.
Well, don't worry, be happy.
But no, not really. We do need to note, though, Dan, the umpiring in this game was downright comical. So Brennan Miller is the ump behind the plate in overall accuracy of 89%, which is 4% below expected. With you want to know how much favor this gave to Cleveland, Dan? 2.24 runs.
Massive number. And that obviously is the deficit and more. We'll talk more about kind of some of these situations here. Matt Wallner had an at-bat where he thought he had ball 4 twice, kind of a low and inside pitch. I wondered about that. That actually got David Popkins tossed. I just wondered in that situation, like, don't you just have to kind of start swinging if you know that the strike zone is wacky?
Well, what's so funny is Castro, he had a rough go of it yesterday because of the strike zone, and he swung on a ball and he got a hit based upon an error from Cleveland. He only swung at that ball because he knew it was going to be called a strike even though it wasn't a strike. And so it just messes with the guy's mindset when he has to play with a strike zone that's nowhere near accurate.
I think another call for robo-umps. We always see this every time, but this is one of the worst scorecards we've seen since the ump scorecards started doing this.
2 more quick notes here. In the top of the 5th, if you haven't seen it, there was a great leaping catch by Correa. I mean, if that doesn't speak to the health of his plantar fasciitis, I don't know what does. And then my favorite thing, because this zone was so bad, Morneau makes a joke about Julian getting a call as a ball that was like the catcher had to fully extend his arm, Dan, to catch the ball from going to the backstop. And so Morneau's like, well, yeah, Julian getting a call there.
And we're going to talk more about Eddie Julian's at-bats in a later segment here, too. In the end, the bullpen is good again for the Twins. Alcala and Jackson, they combined for 3 clean innings with 2 strikeouts apiece, but it's not enough, and I'm worried we're wasting this. And David, it is only a week in, so I do need you to kind of talk me down a little bit as we go through this, because this is a bad week to open the season. Well, Game 3, as you said, was postponed, so that's our series recap. Let's go into the segments.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
I was kind of hoping that I would get a Game 3 here to kind of finish out my comeback attempt here, but in the end, Hogs gets his first win of the season. He picked Alex Kirilloff, who won for the second week in a row. He had 7 points. I picked Carlos Correa, who had 4. David, you picked Ryan Jeffers, who had 0. And then the listeners picked, I think understandably, Byron Buxton, but he had -3, which through 3 series now is the lowest score because, again, he didn't get Game 3 to try to redeem himself.
Yeah, so season standings, then I have a victory, you have a victory, and now Hogs has a victory.
As far as season points scored, you and Hogs each have 14. I have 10. The listeners have 6, but it's early.
It's very early, Dan. We got to keep telling ourselves that. But with that, let's go on to Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
This is a rarity, Dan, here. Your guy didn't win you Puckett's picks, but it looks like you put him as the Beast.
I still picked Carlos Correa, and this is, error aside, which I guess he made up for a little bit with that snare. But the guy just keeps getting on base. His OPS is up to 988 on the year. He had 2 walks in Game 2 as well as a hit. And then in Game 1, he had 3 hits. Like, the guy is doing what he can. It's ironic because people aren't on base in front of him when he's getting these hits. But he is doing what we hoped, both in the field and at bat. And it's hard to ask any more from Carlos Correa right now.
I do think that the mindset of Twins fans needs to shift a little bit, because I think after how last season went and how Carlos Correa appeared to be as a player, I think a lot of people felt like, okay, we overspent. Maybe he's already past his prime. He's still young, but he just seems like not the same guy who was with the Astros hitting bombs in the postseason. But clearly, this is a very good baseball player, and this is a great reminder that this is the guy that they paid the money to.
And now, David, I look at yours and I think this is a pick that I would normally have made for my beast.
I didn't know how to do this, but something needs to be said in one of these segments, Dan. The bullpen, Dan. The bullpen, it's ridiculous. They, again, did not allow an earned run in these two games. How are we squandering these great opportunities when, again, Duran's on the IL, Thielbar's on the IL, Topa's on the IL, and the bullpen is still spotless in this outing, Dan?
It sounds, too, like Thielbar might be back in a week or two. The other guys are kind of lagging behind, but Duran, apparently the pain in his oblique is gone, so now it's just a matter of kind of working back up into baseball shape. So, I'm happy to see Cody Funderburk go whenever that happens. But other than that, I mean, they've got some good, tough choices to make.
It should be noted, Funderburk hasn't been credited with an earned run in this outing, at least, Dan.
No, but he gave up some inherited runs, and I think that, those kind of get skewed a little bit when talking about relievers.
I suppose so. Who do you have on your bench, Dan?
I went with Carlos Santana. He was 0 for 8 with 4 strikeouts. Now, he wasn't the only guy who had 4 strikeouts. There were a lot of guys who did that in this 2-game series. But I'm waiting for more out of this guy that is supposedly going to be the great, well, I don't want to say great, but like a better first baseman than maybe Alex Kirilloff. Because here's the thing. Alex Kirilloff is hitting. And at what point do you sacrifice his defense? Because Carlos Santana hasn't had a big hit yet. And I'm waiting for it. I'm antsy. It's only a week, but I'm antsy.
I mean, he's certainly punished the Twins enough throughout history that you think he's owed us a few big hits and big moments, right?
You would absolutely think so, but he hasn't yet. I see you have another offer for your bench.
0 for 7 with 4 strikeouts. Byron Buxton, I know that he's healthy, and I'm excited about that, but he hasn't had to make any spectacular plays in center as of yet, and he hasn't really done much here, Dan. He's got to get on the ball, and I think he gets so riled up in those big moments. His adrenaline is pumping, and I think pitchers know that, hey, if I throw something low and outside in a big moment when this guy's at the plate, he's going to swing through it. And like, he needs to chill and take a couple pitches. Like, even the very first pitch, even if it's a strike down the middle, like, there's no way you're going to know that, but I think he'd be better served just chilling for a second and seeing the ball out of the pitcher's hand before he starts hacking.
Well, it's time to critique Rocco Baldelli here. Let's move into the rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
So this is what's got me. I know that Eddie Julian's still a base in this series, and that's great. But that's 2 on the season. The Cincinnati Reds have 14. That leads the majors. And, there's gradations between, right? Not many teams have fewer than the Twins. I think it's like 1 or 2. Why is Rocco not sending guys more, given the fact that the Twins are struggling to get hits? Is that something that I should be frustrated with? Or would that be something that we wouldn't even care about if the Twins were just getting a couple more clutch hits?
Doesn't matter what base they're on, Dan, if you can't hit them home.
Totally, right? But, like, can we put more pressure on other teams? Like, why the complacency here? You have speed. Byron Buxton, right? You have him. You have Willie Castro, who stole, I think, 30 last year. You've got Eddie Julian, who's clearly capable. I know that Carlos Correa is not going to steal any bases, and he's getting on base, and nor is Kirilloff. But, like, you must have some guys. Austin Martin, for goodness sake. Has there been no opportunity to send him?
The only critique I'm going to have here, Dan, at your critique is that there haven't been enough opportunities with those speed guys on base for us to know how many stolen bases they would have if they were on base every single time. But Buxton got on base once in this series, Dan, after getting hit by pitch. And so it's like, I don't really know. It's hard to blame him for lack of aggressiveness because there haven't been a ton of opportunities where it makes a ton of sense to send a guy.
But at the same time, like, there must be some opportunity. It's a mindset that I'm critical of here. I wish Rocco was more aggressive in his mindset to try to take second and even third base.
Yeah, I just don't have a ton to say here, Dan. Here's the thing. I would be more upset and I would be more with you if I felt that, like, we had a good sample size, Dan. But again, we're working with so few guys on base that can steal bases in circumstances where it makes sense to steal that it's hard for me to criticize because I don't really know the mindset. It's hard for me to interpret the mindset because we haven't seen him have the option to make that call enough.
Well, and I realize that this team is not built around speed. That's not, like, they're built around power, and that's a separate issue that we're going to talk about. So anyway, what about you here? What's your critique of Rocco?
So do you remember, Dan, the Brewers game and how you were so upset that in the fourth inning, Manny Margot comes in to pinch hit for Eddie Julian. And then he does that weird pop-up bunt that doesn't work well, and it doesn't work out well. You were upset. You remember this?
Which we learned later, that was Manuel Margot's choice. That was not Rocco telling him to do that. So I can't blame Rocco for that, but continue.
Well, it might have been a scapegoat. I'm not always convinced, like, when they say, like, who decided what. Like, every once in a while, you got to think of players taking a hit for the manager. Anyway, why I bring this up, Dan, is you would think then, if that's sort of the precedent being set, that if there's a lefty on the mound in a big moment and it's later in the game, apparently fourth inning is late enough in Rocco's estimation, you would expect a right-handed bat to come in. Well, game 1, Dan, bottom 7, the home opener, there's a pretty good chance for a right-handed bat to come in for either Eddie Julien or Alex Kirilloff with both Jeffers and Farmer on the bench. Well, Rocco decides, no, I'm not going to make that move this time because I got criticized last time. I think Rocco's reading the headlines, he's listening to the podcast, and he's saying, you know what, fine, I'll leave Eddie Julien in. Well, Eddie Julien promptly strikes out. Now, I can at least understand keeping Kirilloff in because at that point, Kirilloff has been the only guy who's shown any sort of offensive production at the plate. But how on earth, Dan, do you justify not bringing in a righty bat in that scenario?
The issue I have here is we spend a lot of breath critiquing Rocco on this, and I don't think Rocco gives it a lot of thought. There's been other moments where he'll just like, oh yeah, I didn't actually think about that very much. He's so offhand about his decisions here. It's weird. It doesn't go with the trend, and I'm okay if he wants to leave Eddie Julien in that spot in other situations, but then don't pull him in the fourth inning for Manny Margot.
I think the problem, yes, here is consistency. Because you read the articles that Aaron Gleeman writes about how, hey, this platoon lefty bat with a righty coming in against left-handed pitching makes a lot of sense and the math checks out. Okay, well then why now not do that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. If this is the path that we're on, and now the fans are coming around to it and we understand how the platooning and the pinch hitting is going to work, we're all ready for it, right? We're all primed up. In that moment at the stadium, Dan, I said, okay, I'm not sure. I'm wondering if it's going to be Jeffers or Farmer. Julien wasn't even in my mind as a possibility to continue in the game, Dan. I thought, nope, that possibility is gone. So then when he's still in the circle and he comes up to the plate, I'm like, what has happened here? It's the inconsistency, Dan, that's the problem. It's not so much the call, because maybe you and I, like we've done previously, would argue that Julien should stay in and bat. But now all of my expectations are all out of whack here, Dan, thinking that Julian's going to get pulled, and then he goes up to taking a bat and strikes out. And now I'm upset at old David, who would have said, yes, keep Julien in. And now it's new David, who's agreeing with Rocco that we should do this platoon situation. I can't keep it straight, Dan. It's keeping me up at night. Loves me not. I'm picking flowers over who should take the at-bats. It's a very difficult time for me.
A David divided against himself. Cannot stand.
Anyway, I think this leads well into the Minnesota moment here, so let's go there.
Minnesota moment.
I assumed you were going to throw the ogres are like onions in on that spot there.
No, that was actually a decent metaphor, Dan. You only get that when it's bad. You get that sounder.
So it does segue well. My Minnesota moment is every time Eddie Julien came up to bat, because it showed all of the things about this Twins team so neatly. So you just mentioned one situation where we thought he wouldn't even be a bat.
Hang on a minute. We could use a pinch.
And then he hits an opposite field home run. Wonderful. That's fantastic. But then he strikes out 5 times looking in 2 games. Eddie, you've seen the strike zone that this umpire is calling. You cannot rely upon him to make fair calls. You have to swing the bat. I know that he gets praised for his eye. Oh, wonderful eye that Eddie Julien has for that 6 inches off the plate. He's not swinging, but you got to swing. It's somewhat, you got to defend the zone here. You're a capable hitter. This is not going to work. If Eddie Julien is going to just decide, whatever, I'm just not going to swing, be a contact guy who just fouls off a bunch of pitches that you don't like until you get one that's truly outside by even the worst umpire's measure.
So actually, I think it was Cody Perkle from Twins Daily who pointed this out, that like a trend for Eddie Julien is he watches a lot of fastballs in the zone for strikes. And that's obviously what we're seeing here. And again, it's early, but you can understand why a guy who's labeled as a walk guy, who's going to see a lot of pitches and get on base, this is the way that the pendulum sort of swings to err in that direction of striking out looking more often than a guy who's not really known as a guy who's going to take a lot of walks.
And teams are going to notice this. They already have, right?
Yeah.
They're cruising fastballs down. He's going to have to start swinging at the first pitch just a couple times to keep guys honest, and he has to defend the plate. And so that's hopefully part of his maturation process as a hitter.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with Correa's air in the home opener just because that game, Dan, I was there. I love the home opener for a lot of reasons. I dislike it for other reasons. But in this instance here, Dan, big players need to make big plays, especially when a game is just really even. Like, it just doesn't feel like much excitement has happened. Everything just seemed to just be plotting its course. Correa has to make that routine play. Super out of character. But I do think that a 3-1 ball game just seems far more in reach than a 4-1 ball game.
Absolutely. And you can't be making the mistakes that he's making there. But we could also argue that Correa was one of the reasons the Twins were even in the game, in both of these games. And so I get it. But he's also going to make mistakes at shortstop. It's a hard position to play for a reason. So we're maybe just getting a little bit spoiled at how good he looks at short. Well, David, let's cruise into the Mauer's musing.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's Musings.
Is it time to fire David Popkins again?
Again? Did they fire him before?
Well, no, but we were all ready for him to get fired this time. I mean, for the first 3 months of last season, we were expecting that David Popkins was going to get fired, and then the Twins turned it around. So should we be worried here about this poor start of these bats?
It does seem consistent with what happened last season, and you have to wonder, oh, well, they turned it around last season. But, like, you would think he would have made some changes then,
yes,
so that they wouldn't struggle in the exact same way this season to start the season.
Like, what's going on here? I mean, you pointed this out. They are taking a lot of walks. They're getting guys on base. And I get that situational hitting can average itself out over the course of the year. The Twins ended up being, I think, pretty decent at that by the end of last year. I'm just frustrated. But the strikeouts are clearly an issue again. 1 week in, even at home, they were worse. You know, like, come on, guys, put the ball on the bat. Just tell the guys, David Popkins, to just, I would rather, like, make some contact. Ground into a double play. I would almost rather have that at this point. I'm that flabbergasted at the situation.
When all you're asking for is a ball in play, like, you don't even care if it results in an out. Just give me a moment of hope that the ball made contact.
Don't give me hope.
I know. Anyway, yours?
Yeah, so I have to wonder, Dan, when do you think we're going to see a roster shakeup? Because Miranda is now playing third base in St. Paul. And if he's swinging the bat well, Dan, he would have been probably one with a bullet, even ahead of Brooks Lee, to come up after the Royce Lewis injury, assuming that Miranda was good to go. So I do wonder how long they're going to have Willie Castro fill in at that third base spot when they have a guy who more naturally plays there in Miranda sitting at AAA.
Austin Martin didn't appear in this 2-game series either. So it's
That's
not
what
like
I'm saying, yeah.
So I think you got to give Miranda a chance to play that third base. Now, I think this is funny. What would happen if, let's say, he starts to play third base really well and Royce comes back? I guess do you move? I guess in that situation, that's a good problem to have, and Miranda can stay on the roster and play some first base or some DH. But he's also not as flexible as other guys. You can't play him at second. You can't do. He's a first baseman, third baseman, and a DH.
Yeah, I want to see it, honestly. I think just making a move here would maybe give this team a boost. And like a guy like Jose Miranda, who's no stranger to the big leagues, that he's just struggled to get back. I think if he came back, especially if he was successful, Dan, I think that would change the morale of the team that I would hope. I hate to say hope, but like if they're not feeling down after the way this series went, they should be feeling a little bit bad about that.
And they got the Dodgers coming to town for 3 games. You know, it's not like this road gets easy.
I mean, if it's not going to be Brooks Lee, it might as well be Linwell. Oh, sorry.
I am not throwing away my shot.
Sorry, Jose Miranda. My
Yes.
apologies.
Good
Jose
try,
Miranda.
yes. You're such a Hamilton hen, David. I understand why you made that mistake.
I make the references all day, every day.
All
man.
day,
People
all
can't
day.
stop. Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep pushing here. Series grades time.
Series grades.
So as always, Dan, I'm going to go first to save us a little bit of time. I want to get comfortable. I want to get my beverage in hand, so I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I'm going to give them a D-. And the only reason it's not an F, I realize they went 0-2 and they had no offensive production to speak of, but it's so hard, Dan, because it's like, I'm sure it's like for you when you're grading a group project and the overall results of the project was poor, but you can tell that there was a whole segment of that group really bringing the project value down.
Ogres are like onions.
Because the bullpen deserves so much credit here, Dan, that I have to give them something, and unfortunately that something is a D-, which is the best I can give when you go 0-2.
Would you say, like, did you need more out of Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan as well from this series?
The thing is, no, because Joe Ryan made one mistake and it was still 3 runs, but he went 6 innings. 3 runs should not be Everest, Dan. It shouldn't be that complicated for the offense to put up more than 3 runs. And Pablo, even though he struggled, he stayed in the game far longer than I thought he was going to. I just think that nearly all of the blame needs to be placed at the feet of the offense.
You know, when I look at my 2-category rubric here, I'm actually have a lot of the same logic, but just in these 2 different spots. The advanced retreat, idea, did this team, does it look better now? Did they take steps forward from where they were last series, or did they take steps back? And I thought this was a big step back. Aside from the bullpen, everything else didn't look great. Pablo and Joe, just talked about them. At the same time, this is your 1-2 punch. And so you would hope one of them could have given a 6-inning, 1-run start to keep the offense even a little bit closer. I gave him a 3 out of 10 on that. I thought this is a big step back offensively. Aside from Alex Kirilloff, who had a great series, and Correa was able to get on base, nobody else is stepping up in this situation. And then as far as well-played baseball, that's kind of what I'm calling the fundamentals now. I gave him a 4 out of 10 because they didn't move the runners in the way that you did. I did like that they were at least getting guys on base a little bit, but there weren't weren't like any great plays. Like other than Kirillov's hit and maybe and Julian's home run, like nothing was like, oh, that was a cool baseball play. We saw more bungled plays than great ones.
I don't think that those scores are terrible. We still have to give them what your final grade is, though, Dan.
Oh, yes. So 7 out of 20, which is an F. That's one of my lowest grades ever.
My goodness, you must be real upset.
It's harsh because it's the home opener, too. You expect a little bit more out of this team to step up in these beautiful weathered days. Well, I shouldn't say beautiful weather, right? But like it's April. You want them to play better in this opening home series against a division rival like the Guardians, too.
Who shouldn't even really be a division rival. Like, honestly, like we should win this division far and away, but it's starting to look more and more like we're going to be fighting for every victory.
At least for a couple months here.
All right, well, with that, Dan, we're going to actually insert a new segment here. I don't know that we're going to do this every episode, but we only had 2 games to cover. We were expecting to cover 3, but this is Min for the Win mailbag.
Min for the Win mailbag.
Of course, nobody needs mail.
So, folks, if you have something you want to say to us, if you have a comment or a question or anything like that, you can feel free to reach out to us on X or on Facebook or on Instagram. We would love to talk about it on the show. And so our first entry here, Dan, comes from a listener, namesake actually, named Dan also. He is explaining his perspective on your grading issues, and he's trying to explain why your rubric is troublesome, the way that you used it in the first series recap of the season. So Dan says, this is the issue that Dan's running in. If you think about grading the series like grading papers, there's objective things to grade, like fundamentals in the games, or in the writing of a paper, the punctuation, your sentence formulation, concise and clear argumentation. But then there's the subject grading, which is the expectations for the Twins for the game, but then for papers, it's was the topic interesting? Was it persuasive? Was it engaging? So the divide that's happening here between the subjective and the objective, Dan says, is the divide between the head and the heart. So Dan says your primary issue, Dan Thompson, is that you're trying to quantify an objective series result with the subjective expectation. Your response, how do you feel?
That's well said. I mean, overall. Now, I would argue that in writing, there is no subjective, right? There's either is good writing or bad writing in some sense. That even the, quote, subjective things like persuasiveness and engagingness are actually products of just good writing decisions. But I do appreciate the head and the heart concept because it is hard to quantify the heart, David, and yet that's what I'm trying to do.
Every time. He also followed up that he thought the replacement, your initial grading with the advanced retreat is confusing because he wants to know if a team gets swept by a bad team, that's clearly a 1. But if in the next series they get swept by an equally bad team, is that a 1 also? Or is it a 5 because they haven't moved from their previous retreat status?
I think if it's just getting worse and worse, it's still a retreat, right? You're still losing ball games and you're losing hope. So yes, that is an interesting critique too, but I take less umbrage with that one.
Fair enough. With that though, Dan, let's go ahead into Herbie's headlines.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
A few different things to talk about, Dan. Some fun stuff and some not so fun stuff. So big news here. Across the MLB, more and more pitchers seem to be going down with elbow injuries. Now, the MLB Players Association came out with a statement saying that the pitch clock is to blame for this rise in pitchers' elbows injuries because they don't have enough time to recover between pitches. The MLB says no, the rates have been rising for years. This is just the way it works with new pitches coming out. These sweepers, guys are putting more and more strain on their elbows, so it makes sense that there'd be more injuries. I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
This was a weird response by Major League Baseball because they came out like firing. I get that there's a principle that they're kind of fighting for, but like this seemed like an inappropriately fiery response given the situation. I do agree with Major League Baseball a little bit more that like this isn't really about the pitch clock, but at the same time, you can also admit that like, I don't know, to me it spoke to the negative vibe between these two organizations, between the MLBPA and the MLB. Why are you so disproportionately mad about this? Because it's pretty clear that you're right, or I should say the baseball's right, where like it's all of the weird pitches that they're doing and they're putting. I mean, there's a reason that high schoolers can't use curveballs. They're not allowed to do that for quite some time because it's hard to throw on and it's bad for your body to just throw a bunch of curveballs.
Yeah, I think that the MLB looked primarily at AAA to see the injuries to those pitchers because of the pitch clock, because it's been installed there for a while, and their arguments are sound. It's really hard to feel it, though, as a fan who's not throwing the ball and having to throw it every 20 seconds, right? So yeah. I'm sure that is difficult, but yeah, I don't know, unless they can sort of prove out conclusively that that is what's causing the injuries. I think that so much has been gained for the sport because of the pitch clock. To make this change, unless you can conclusively prove that's what's causing injuries, I think it's got to stay in place, Dan.
I also don't love that the MLB just cites, a quote from Johns Hopkins analysis, finding no evidence to support that the introduction of the pitch clock has increased injuries, rather than can you show me the data? Can you just show that it's different? I feel like we're just kind of relying on the expert opinion here, where it's well, you could pretty clearly just demonstrate it through a percent, rather than giving me, what the study is. It's shrouded in just a little bit too much mystery. If it's really that clear, MLB, just show us the data.
Yeah, show a trend line chart. It shouldn't be
that's
that
all it takes.
complicated to put together. In more fun news, Dan, the Yankees were just taking some batting practice like usual, and an earthquake happened, and nobody seemed to care. They just kept hitting BP.
I mean, did Aaron Judge cause the earthquake? Did he hit a ball?
All rise for Dan's Judge Love.
Did he hit a ball so hard that it made the ground shake? That's my question. Was that not the epicenter? Wasn't in the Bronx? That wasn't where they've pinpointed it? Speaking of science and showing us the data, I want to know.
Also, I would not have been able to tell you that New York had earthquakes, Dan. Once again, my geography are they on a fault line? Isn't that what causes earthquakes?
We're kind of out of our depth. Isn't that why Long Island is, so far away? Because anyway, I don't know.
I just thought it was an island like Hawaii. What's the difference? I don't know.
Well, that's because of geology too, right? That's because of the volcanoes, David.
That they exist, right? Wow.
Yes.
Dan,
We
are exposing some dangerous blind spots. We should probably move on here.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
Last note here for Herbie's headlines. The Phillies dropped their new City Connects jerseys, and they just say Philly on the front in sort of this weird font. I don't actually love them, but the Twins, obviously, they're going to get their City Connect jerseys at some point. They're scheduled to wear them on June 14th, it looks like, so we'll probably see them drop before then. But also in Twins jersey news, the reason you haven't seen the alternate Twin Cities with the blue lettering, the white jerseys, is because the pants are on back order, Dan. And so they can't put the team in those jerseys because they don't have enough pants to go around.
This is what gets me. So you watch the NCAA tournament, and in a matter of a few days, they can turn around all of these shirts that have I forget what it is this year, energy something, for all the different teams. I mean, they print thousands of these things overnight, and they can't figure out how to make pants for a baseball team?
Can't be done. Well, they're not running to Walmart, Dan, to pick them up. I assume there's a little bit more going on.
All right, David, one more segment for today. Looking forward to Puckett's picks for the Dodgers series.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
Well, the listeners, Dan, are going to take Kirilloff off the board, which is not shocking. I actually get next pick. I'm going to take Correa, and then it'll go to you, and then to Hogue.
I know that he's struck out a lot, but he's one of the only guys with hits and runners in scoring position this year, so I'm going to stick with Buxton.
Not a bad choice. Hogues is going to take Jeffers. And I am happy, Dan, that we have the 4 picks now. It's super interesting when you get to that 4th guy, because I didn't have a clue who Hogues was going to take once we got to him this time.
Lots of options there. Maybe he's waiting for the breakout of Carlos Santana. One of these times, he's bound to get a hit.
You would think so, but I don't know. Until we see some success, Dan, I'm going to put all of my eggs in the Alex Kirilloff basket.
I'm just picturing a Tyrannosaurus Rex carrying an Easter basket and walking around Isla Nublar or something like that.
Well, actually, wouldn't in this illustration the T-Rex would be in the basket, right?
That's even funnier, actually. Yeah. All right. Well, David, I hope that the Twins can finally get a home victory here. Hope that the weather is better, and I'm going to go ahead and send us out. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page and Instagram page as well. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, 2 avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.